You'll get your certified letter in a few days, Mr. Jensen. The lien has been filed. This house, this property, it belongs to the association now. You should have just paid the fine. Her voice was a sickening mix of triumph and condescension, the sound of a petty tyrant relishing a small, cruel victory. I just looked at Brenda, the self-appointed queen of our little suburban HOA, her face flushed with the thrill of power. She stood on my lawn, a place she had no right to be, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the house my late wife and I had chosen for our quiet final years. I had only gotten one of those years with Sarah here. Now, it was just me. I let the silence hang in the air, thick and heavy like the summer humidity. I let her savor her moment. It's important to let people like Brenda feel like they've won. It makes their fall so much more spectacular. It's a lesson I learned over 30 years in commercial finance, watching arrogant men in expensive suits dig their own graves with a silver shovel of hubris. Brenda's shovel was just a plastic trowel from the garden section, but she was digging with the same reckless glee. The bank will be very interested to hear about this, I said, my voice calm and even. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, a line item on a future balance sheet. She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that startled a robin from the oak tree by the driveway. The bank? Oh, please. They don't care about a piddly little HOA lien. We are the authority here. And you are in violation. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. We'll see. That was the beginning of the end for her. She just didn't know it yet. She thought she was foreclosing on my home. In reality, she was signing the demolition order for her own pathetic little empire. And the irony, the beautiful, delicious irony, was that I was the one who held the mortgage. Not on my house. On hers. On the clubhouse, the pool, the tennis courts. On her entire kingdom. My name is Mark Jensen, and I'm what you'd call a retired numbers guy. For most of my life, I managed high-risk commercial real estate portfolios for one of the country's largest financial institutions. I didn't just look at spreadsheets, I analyzed the very bones of a deal, the structural integrity of a business plan. I could smell a bad investment from a mile away, the way a dog can smell rain coming. It was a good living, but it was a demanding one. When my wife, Sarah, got sick, I cashed out. We wanted time, the one commodity no amount of money can buy. We found Lakeside Meadows online. The pictures showed a postcard-perfect community, manicured lawns, a sparkling blue lake, a pristine community clubhouse. The marketing brochure promised serenity and peace after years in the concrete jungle of the city and the sterile quiet of hospital rooms. It sounded like heaven. We bought a modest but beautiful house with a large backyard, perfect for the garden Sarah had always dreamed of. For a year, it was exactly that. It was heaven. We planted roses and lavender. We sat on the porch and watched the sunset over the lake. We held hands. Then, I lost her. The silence she left behind was deafening, a void I tried to fill by pouring every ounce of my energy into the garden we had started together. It was the only place I still felt close to her. Lakeside Meadows was governed by a homeowners association, a fact that barely registered when we bought the place. I paid my dues on time, kept my lawn mowed, and brought my trash cans in promptly. I was a model resident. I wanted nothing more than to be left alone with my memories and my roses. Then Brenda happened. Brenda was the HOA president, a title she wore like a crown. She was a woman in her late 50s with a helmet of lacquered blonde hair and a perpetual expression of sour disapproval. She drove a golf cart around the neighborhood, not for recreation, but for surveillance. She carried a clipboard and a measuring tape, a pint-sized dictator looking for infractions. My first real interaction with her came about a month after Sarah passed. I received a notice in the mail, a crisp envelope with the HOA's self-important logo embossed on it. It was a fine. $50. The reason? The trim on my house was painted Swiss coffee, an unapproved shade of white. The approved shade, according to the attached swatch, was decorator's white. I stared at the two shades. They were, for all intents and purposes, identical. A fly could land on one and then the other and not know it had traveled. I checked the paperwork from the sale of the house. The previous owners had, in fact, gotten the Swiss coffee approved by the board 5 years prior. I had the signed approval form. I went to the next monthly HOA meeting, held in the clubhouse that I would soon come to know in excruciating detail. I waited patiently until the new business portion of the meeting, then stood up and calmly explained the situation. I presented the signed approval form. Brenda looked at the paper as if I had handed her a piece of used tissue. "This form is outdated," she declared, not even looking at the date. "The bylaws were updated 2 years ago. Swiss Coffee is no longer compliant. You have 30 days to repaint, and the fine still stands." A man in the front row, who I later learned was her husband and the board's secretary, nodded vigorously. A few other residents shifted uncomfortably in their metal folding chairs. "But this was approved," I repeated, keeping my voice level. "The house was sold to me in this condition, a condition the HOA itself sanctioned. It seems unreasonable to penalize a new owner for a decision the board made years ago." "Reason has nothing to do with it," Brenda sniffed. "The rules are the rules. Are we done here?" I knew then that logic was not a currency she traded in. I paid the fine and the cost to have the trim repainted. It was a few $100s. It was easier to comply, to make the problem go away. I just wanted peace. I wanted to be left alone to tend Sarah's garden. That was my mistake. In Brenda's world, compliance wasn't seen as cooperation. It was seen as weakness, as a soft spot to press until something broke. My simple desire for a quiet life made me her perfect target. The violation notices started coming weekly. My garden hose was visible from the street. A single weed, a tiny sprout of crabgrass, was found near my mailbox. A package was left on my porch for more than 3 hours. Each notice came with a fine, escalating from $50 to $100, then $200. I contested each one in writing, creating a meticulous paper trail. I sent registered letters, complete with photographs and references to the specific, often contradictory, sections of the HOA bylaws she was citing. I treated it like a financial audit. Document everything. Assume nothing. Trust no one. Her responses were dismissive, handwritten scrawls on my letters which she would leave taped to my front door. Pay the fine, not an excuse, final notice. The harassment became more personal. She would park her golf cart on the edge of my lawn and just sit there, staring at my house. She'd make loud, critical comments about my gardening to neighbors who walked by, just loud enough for me to hear through my open window. Such a shame. That garden is becoming an eyesore. Sarah would be so disappointed. Hearing her speak my wife's name was like a hot poker to the chest. It was a calculated cruelty, designed to inflict the maximum amount of pain. I felt the ice begin to form in my veins. The peace I had sought was a distant memory. This was no longer a disagreement over rules, it was a war of attrition, and she had just made it personal. The turning point, the moment the quiet, grieving husband died and the cold, methodical analyst took over, came on a Tuesday. It was a violation notice stuck to my door with an excessive amount of tape. It wasn't about a weed or a garden hose. It was about the lavender. The Lavandula angustifolia specimens in your front garden bed are not on the approved list of flora, the notice read, the pompous language clearly her own. They are considered a non-native, invasive species. You have 7 days to remove them, or they will be removed by the association's landscaping service at your expense. A fine of $500 is also levied. Sarah had planted that lavender. It was the last thing we did together in the garden. I remembered the feel of the sun on our backs, the smell of the earth, the way she smiled when she patted the soil around the final plant. That lavender wasn't just a flower, it was a memory. It was sacred ground. Brenda's threat to have it ripped out was a desecration. It was an act of such profound, targeted malice that it broke through my grief and my desire to be left alone. It flipped a switch deep inside me. The part of me that had managed billions of dollars in assets, that had dismantled corrupt corporate structures, that had foreclosed on empires built on lies, woke up from its slumber. I looked at the notice, then out at the lavender, its purple flowers swaying gently in the breeze. A cold, quiet rage settled over me. It wasn't hot and explosive, but dense and heavy, like a block of solid steel. Brenda wanted a war. Fine. But she was bringing a golf cart and a clipboard to a battle of financial derivatives and legal loopholes. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought she was poking a lonely old man. She was about to find out she was kicking a hornet's nest, and that I owned the company that made the hornets. That evening, I didn't write a letter. I didn't file a dispute. I opened my laptop and went to work. My career had taught me that every entity, no matter how small, has a paper trail. Every organization has financial arteries. And if you squeeze those arteries, the entire structure collapses. I started with the basics. I went to the county's public records website and pulled the deeds for every property in Lakeside Meadows. I cross-referenced them with the HOA's founding documents and bylaws, which I had downloaded from their outdated website. It was tedious, painstaking work, like piecing together a 1,000-piece puzzle in a dimly lit room. Then I pulled the HOA's financials. As a registered nonprofit corporation, they had to file publicly. The records were sparse, but they were there. I downloaded 5 years' worth of budgets and expense reports. I opened a new spreadsheet, the tool of my trade, my scalpel. At first glance, everything looked mundane. Dues collection, insurance premiums, utilities for the common areas. But one line item jumped out at me. Common area landscaping. It was huge. It was, by far, the single largest expense in the budget, more than the insurance, the pool maintenance, and the administrative costs combined. It had also increased by 30% every year for the past 3 years, the exact length of time Brenda had been president. That was a red flag. Landscaping costs don't typically balloon like that without a major capital project, and there hadn't been one. I looked for the vendor's name. Evergreenscapes LLC. I did a quick corporate search. The company was registered just over 3 years ago. The address listed was a post office box in a neighboring town. There was no website, no public phone number. The registered agent for Evergreenscapes LLC. A man named David Cooper. A quick social media search for Brenda revealed her maiden name. Cooper. David Cooper was her brother. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator catching a familiar scent on the wind. Embezzlement. Plain and simple. She was funneling HOA dues to a shell company run by her brother. She wasn't just a power-hungry tyrant, she was a common thief. This was good. This was a felony. But it wasn't enough. Accusing her of embezzlement would turn into a messy, protracted, she said, battle. I needed something more. I needed leverage that was absolute and undeniable. I needed the financial equivalent of a nuclear weapon. I went back to the county records. I wasn't looking at my house anymore. I was looking at the common areas, the clubhouse, the pool, the tennis courts, the small strip of land by the lake. I wanted to see who owned them. As expected, they were owned by the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association Incorporated. But as I scanned the deed history, I saw something else. Something that made my heart start to beat a little faster. A UCC-1 filing. A lien. A big one. There was a mortgage on the common properties. This was unusual. Most well-established HOAs own their common areas outright. A mortgage meant debt. It meant they were leveraged. It meant they had a weakness. I clicked on the mortgage document. The amount was staggering, well into 7 figures. It was taken out 2.5 years ago, shortly after Brenda became president. The stated purpose was capital improvements. I looked around the neighborhood. The clubhouse had a new coat of paint and the pool had been resurfaced. Those were not 7-figure improvements. Not even close. Where had the rest of that money gone? My eyes immediately went back to the Evergreenscapes line item. She hadn't just been embezzling dues. She had been embezzling a massive commercial loan. She had mortgaged the entire community's assets and was siphoning off the money. My hands were trembling slightly as I scrolled down the document to the lender's name. I was expecting a local credit union or a regional bank. My jaw dropped. It was my old firm. The bank I had worked at for 32 years. I leaned back in my chair, a low chuckle escaping my lips. It was a sound I hadn't made in a long time. It was the sound of a game board being flipped, of a hunter realizing he wasn't the prey, he was the owner of the entire forest. Brenda had no idea. She thought she was fighting a retired old man over some flowers. She had no clue that the institution that held the financial fate of her entire kingdom in its hands wasn't just a place I used to work. It was a place where I had built my career. The head of the commercial real estate division was a man I had personally mentored. The senior risk officer for that portfolio was a woman I had promoted twice. They weren't just colleagues, they were friends. They owed me favors. She had picked a fight with the one resident in her entire fiefdom who could not only see the rod in her foundation but who also owned the wrecking ball. The plan began to form in my mind, not as a vague idea of revenge, but as a structured project plan with phases, milestones, and deliverables. Phase 1, Data Collection. Phase 2, Controlled Escalation and Baiting. Phase 3, Asset Seizure. Phase 1 was already well underway, but I needed more than just financial documents. I needed proof of her harassment, proof that was visceral and undeniable. My neighbor across the street was a man named Frank. He was a retired police detective, a quiet guy who mostly kept to himself. I'd seen him watching Brenda's antics with a look of weary disdain. He was the perfect ally. I walked over the next morning with a couple of coffees. We sat on his porch, and I laid out the whole story, from the paint trim to the lavender. I didn't mention the mortgage yet. I wanted his perspective as a cop. She's a classic bully, he said after a long sip of coffee. Gets her kicks from making other people miserable. The problem is, people like that know how to stay just inside the lines. Harassment is hard to prove. So I need her to cross the lines, I said. You need her to cross them on camera, he corrected. He told me about the best home security systems, the ones with night vision and motion activation that could upload directly to a secure cloud server. He gave me advice on camera placement, ensuring I covered my property without infringing on anyone else's privacy. He knew the law. That afternoon, I ordered a top-of-the-line system. It arrived 2 days later. I spent a weekend installing it, concealing tiny, powerful cameras in the eaves of my house, in a birdhouse, and in the thick foliage of a holly bush. They were invisible, but they saw everything. My entire front yard, especially Sarah's garden, was now under 24/7 surveillance. Now for Phase 2, Baiting the Trap. The violation notice had given me 7 days to remove the lavender. I was on day 5. I decided to up the ante. I went to the nursery and bought 3 dozen beautiful, vibrant, and most certainly not on the approved list marigolds. I spent the afternoon planting them all around the lavender, creating a riot of color, a beautiful act of defiance. It was like waving a giant red flag in front of a very stupid, very angry bull. I also sent Brenda a registered letter. In it, I formally refused to remove the lavender, citing the deep personal significance and questioning the board's authority to regulate such matters without a clear, pre-existing rule in the bylaws. I had checked, there was none. I also informed her that any attempt by her or any agent of the HOA to enter my property to remove the plants would be considered trespassing and vandalism, and that I would prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. I wanted her to know I was fighting back. I wanted her to feel challenged. I wanted to make her angry. People like Brenda make mistakes when they're angry. The next 2 days were quiet. Too quiet. I watched her on the cameras, doing her rounds in her golf cart. She would slow down as she passed my house, her head turned, her face a mask of fury. She was stewing. She was planning. The 7th day came and went. The lavender and marigolds remained untouched. I received another letter. This one informed me that since I had failed to comply, the $500 fine had been doubled, and a daily penalty of $100 was now being applied. This was perfect. She was creating the very paper trail I needed, documenting her own unreasonable escalation. She was digging her grave deeper, one ridiculous fine at a time. The moment I was waiting for came on a moonless night a week later. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my front yard camera. I opened the live feed, my heart pounding with a cold, thrilling anticipation. There she was. Dressed in dark clothing, a ridiculous black ski mask pulled over her helmet of hair. It was unmistakably Brenda. She was carrying a garden trowel and a large bucket. She crept onto my lawn, moving with a clumsy stealth that was almost comical. She went straight for the garden. Straight for the marigolds. She started digging them up, yanking them out of the earth with a vicious energy, stuffing them into her bucket. Then, she moved to the lavender. She hesitated for a second, then started hacking at the base of the plants, my wife's plants, with the sharp edge of the trowel. I watched, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a profound, chilling sense of victory. I had her. It was all there, recorded in crystal clear high-definition infrared video. The HOA president, the self-proclaimed guardian of rules and property values, trespassing and vandalizing a resident's property in the dead of night. She spent 10 minutes destroying the garden before scurrying away into the darkness. The camera captured it all. Her face when she briefly lifted the mask to wipe sweat from her brow. The license plate on her golf cart parked hastily down the street. It was perfect. It was irrefutable. The next morning, I didn't call the police. Not yet. This was a piece of ammunition, and I wasn't going to fire it until the perfect moment. This video wasn't just evidence of vandalism, it was a character reference. It was a window into her soul, and I was going to show it to everyone at the right time. Instead, I went to the HOA meeting scheduled for that evening. I walked in and took a seat in the back. The air was thick with tension. Brenda had clearly been talking to her supporters. A few of them shot me dirty looks. Most of my other neighbors just stared at their laps, wanting to be anywhere else. Brenda called the meeting to order. She went through the old business with brisk efficiency, her voice full of her usual self-importance. Then she came to new business. First item, she announced, a smug smile on her face. The continued and flagrant violations at Mr. Jensen's property. As of today, his fines total $3,200. He has refused to comply with the association's directives. He has refused to pay his fines. This kind of defiance threatens the very fabric of our community. She let her words hang in the air. Therefore, the board has voted unanimously to place a lien on his property for the amount of the fines, plus legal fees. If he does not pay within 30 days, the association will begin foreclosure proceedings. A gasp went through the small crowd. This was an escalation no one had expected. Foreclosure. She was going to try to take my house. Over flowers. This was the moment. I stood up. Brenda, I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. You will address me as Madam President, she snapped. Brenda, I repeated, letting her title hang unsaid, a deliberate show of disrespect. Before the board formalizes this ridiculous and illegal action, I have a motion. I move that all fines against my property be dismissed immediately, on the grounds that they are arbitrary, capricious, and levied in bad faith by a president with a clear personal vendetta. Someone in the back clapped, but quickly stifled the sound. Brenda's face turned a shade of crimson I had previously only seen on overripe tomatoes. You are out of order, she shrieked, banging her gavel on the cheap folding table. There is no motion. You are a delinquent member. You have no voice here. According to Section 4, subsection C of the bylaws, I said, my voice never rising, any member in good standing can propose a motion. My dues are fully paid. Therefore, I am in good standing. The fines are a separate, disputed matter. I had read the bylaws cover to cover. I knew them better than she did. I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, quickly replaced by rage. She was cornered, and she was going to lash out. Fine, she spat. You want a vote? Let's vote. All in favor of dismissing the fines for this rule breaker. I looked around the room. I saw fear. I saw people who hated Brenda but were too afraid of her to cross her. A few hands went up, tentatively. Frank's, of course. A young couple in the back. But most people stayed still, their eyes fixed on the floor. All in favor of upholding the fines and proceeding with the lien? Brenda asked, her voice dripping with venom. Her husband's hand shot up, along with those of the other two board members, her hand-picked cronies. A few of her supporters in the audience joined them. The motion to dismiss was defeated. The lien was approved. I had expected this. I wasn't trying to win the vote. I was trying to put on a show. I wanted the community to see her for what she was. I wanted them to witness her irrational fury, her blatant disregard for her own rules. I wanted them to be there, so they would remember this moment when the truth finally came out. As the meeting broke up, Brenda walked over to me, her face a mask of triumphant rage. That's when she delivered the line that would echo in my memory. "You'll get your certified letter in a few days, Mr. Jensen. The lien has been filed. This house, this property, it belongs to the association now. You should have just paid the fine." I just gave her that calm, knowing look. "The bank will be very interested to hear about this." Her derisive laughter followed me out of the clubhouse. The certified letter arrived 3 days later. It was all there in stark, official-looking print. A legal lien against my property. It was a deeply personal attack, a violation of the one place I felt safe, the sanctuary I had built with my wife. But looking at it, I felt no fear. I felt the calm certainty of a chess player who sees the checkmate 10 moves away. This document was Brenda's signature on her own confession. It was the final piece of evidence I needed for Phase 3. With the lien filed, Brenda's campaign of harassment escalated into a full-blown war. She was no longer content with fines and nasty notes. She was trying to ruin my life. She posted a long, rambling screed on the community Facebook page, painting me as a dangerous deviant who refused to follow rules and was single-handedly destroying the aesthetic harmony of Lakeside Meadows. She hinted at other issues and unsettling behavior, a vague but sinister accusation designed to turn my neighbors against me. Some of them bought it. I started getting cold shoulders when I checked my mail. A woman pulled her child closer when I walked by the community playground. It was isolating and ugly, but I knew it was temporary. The truth had a way of coming out. I was just methodically building the stage for its grand entrance. The most vicious attack came a week later. I received a call from the state board that governed financial planners. A formal complaint had been filed against me for unethical conduct and moral turpitude, citing my disregard for community covenants as evidence that I could not be trusted with financial matters. The complaint demanded a full review of my license. Even though I was retired, I kept my license active. It was a matter of professional pride. The complaint was anonymous, but it was signed with a flourish I recognized. It was Brenda's handwriting. She had forged a neighbor's signature. It was a clumsy, desperate move, but a dangerous one. A professional conduct review is a serious, stressful ordeal. This was the final escalation. She had come after my home, my reputation, and now my professional legacy. The time for quiet data collection was over. It was time to bring the full weight of the financial world crashing down on her head. It was time to call the bank. I didn't call the customer service line. I called the private cell phone number of Tom Prescott, the executive vice president of the commercial real estate division. I had hired Tom as a junior analyst 30 years ago. "Mark. It's been too long. How are you?" his voice boomed over the phone. "I'm fine, Tom. Listen, I'm calling for 2 reasons. First, as a friend, to let you know I'm okay. But second, I'm calling as a former senior officer of this bank, with a warning. You have a seriously compromised asset in your portfolio." There was a pause. The friendly tone in his voice was replaced by the sharp focus of a banker. "Go on," he said. I laid it all out. The name of the HOA. The loan number, which I had gotten from the public filing. The shell corporation. The embezzlement. The name of the HOA president. I explained that she was engaged in a pattern of illegal activity and that the loan itself was likely procured under fraudulent pretenses. I told him she was using the HOA's funds, which were meant to service his bank's loan, for personal enrichment. "Jesus, Mark," he breathed. "Are you sure?" "I'm looking at the bank statements and the corporate filings right now, Tom. I'm 100% certain. This isn't just a mismanaged property, it's an active crime scene. The president is unstable. She's placing illegal liens on residents' homes. She's committing acts of vandalism." Vandalism. Yes. I have her on video. "Tom, this is going to blow up. When it does, the press is going to ask why the bank gave a multi-million-dollar loan to a tiny HOA and didn't do its due diligence. They're going to ask why you didn't notice that the loan payments were coming from an entity actively being defrauded by its own president." I let that sink in. I was speaking his language. Risk. Exposure. Reputational damage. "What do you need, Mark?" he asked, his voice now grim. I need you to launch an immediate internal audit of that loan. I need you to put the HOA on notice of default. The loan covenants almost certainly have a clause about criminal activity and financial mismanagement. I need a representative from your legal department ready to act. Because in about a week, this woman is going to be arrested. It's done, he said without hesitation. We'll courier a default notice tomorrow. Consider the asset flagged. We'll have our best people on it. I hung up the phone, a feeling of cold, hard satisfaction washing over me. I had just set a fire at the base of Brenda's throne. The heat was coming. But there was one more piece I needed. The embezzlement case was strong, but her brother could try to take the fall. The fraud was clear, but she could claim ignorance. I needed something that tied it all directly and irrevocably to her. I needed a whistleblower. I thought about the faces at the HOA meeting. The fear. The frustration. There was one woman, Carol, the board's treasurer. She was a quiet, mousy accountant who always looked terrified of Brenda. She signed the checks. She had to know what was going on. She was my most likely candidate. The problem was, I couldn't approach her directly. It would put her at risk and make her look like a co-conspirator. I had to create a situation where she would feel compelled to come to me. The bank's default notice was the perfect catalyst. It arrived via courier the next afternoon. A panicked special board meeting was called for that evening. I watched from my window as Carol and the other board members scurried into Brenda's house, their faces pale with anxiety. I could only imagine the scene inside. Brenda, trying to spin the situation, to blame the bank, to blame me. But Carol was an accountant. She would understand what a default notice meant. She would understand that the financial house of cards was collapsing. She would be terrified of going down with it. My phone rang at 10 o'clock that night. A blocked number. "Is this Mr. Jensen?" a small, shaky voice asked. "Yes." "Is this Carol?" There was a sharp intake of breath. "How did you?" Yes. I can't talk long. She's going crazy. She's blaming you for the bank notice. She's saying you're trying to destroy the community." "Carol," I said, my voice calm and reassuring. "I'm not trying to destroy the community. I'm trying to save it. You know what she's been doing, don't you? With the money." A sob caught in her throat. I knew it was wrong. The invoices for the landscaping company. They were just numbers on a page. No details. She made me sign the checks. She said it was for a special project. Then the loan. Most of the money just vanished into that account. I was too scared to say anything. She threatened me. She said she'd ruin my career. "She can't hurt you anymore," I said. "But you have to make a choice. Are you going to be her victim, or are you going to help me stop her?" "What can I do?" she whispered. "I need proof that she knowingly directed those payments. Emails. Memos. Anything that shows her ordering you to pay her brother's company from the loan funds. That's the smoking gun, Carol. That's what will protect you and put her away for good." "There are emails," she said, her voice a little stronger now. She sent them from her personal account to mine, telling me exactly how much to transfer and when. She thought it was clever, keeping it off the official HOA server. "Can you get them to me?" "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "I'll forward them to you tonight." An hour later, a new email appeared in my inbox from an anonymous address. It was a chain of messages between Brenda and Carol. The instructions were explicit, the amounts were clear. It was a signed confession in digital ink. She had ordered the embezzlement of loan funds. That wasn't just a civil matter for the bank. It was wire fraud. A federal crime. I now had everything. The video of the vandalism. The paper trail of harassment. The evidence of financial fraud and embezzlement. The proof of wire fraud. And the ultimate weapon, the bank, now fully aware and ready to foreclose on her entire kingdom. The final showdown was set. Brenda, in her infinite arrogance, had scheduled an emergency community-wide meeting. The agenda, to hold a public vote on foreclosing on my lien. She didn't have to. The board had already approved it. But she wanted a public shaming. She wanted to stand before the entire community and have them validate her power by voting to cast me out. It was the height of hubris, and it was the perfect stage for her downfall. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I met with Frank and 2 detectives from the Economic Crimes Unit. I walked them through the entire case file I had assembled. They were impressed. They agreed to attend the meeting, out of uniform, and to act when I gave them the signal. I also spoke with Tom's legal counsel at the bank. Their representative would also be there. The plan was set. All the pieces were in place. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. It seemed every resident of Lakeside Meadows was there. The air crackled with anticipation. This was more than just an HOA meeting, it was a spectacle. Brenda sat at the head table, flanked by her cronies. She looked radiant, basking in the attention. She saw me walk in and gave me a smile of pure, venomous triumph. I just nodded politely and took a seat in the front row, a laptop bag at my feet. Frank sat a few rows behind me. The 2 detectives were near the back, looking like bored dads. The bank's lawyer, a sharp woman in a gray suit, sat in the corner, an observer. Brenda banged her gavel. "Welcome, everyone. We are here tonight to deal with a cancer in our community. A man who believes the rules don't apply to him. A man who has spit in the face of our community standards and forced us to take this drastic, but necessary, action." She went on for 10 minutes, a tirade of self-aggrandizing nonsense and outright lies. She painted herself as the valiant defender of property values and me as a rogue agent of chaos. When she was finally done, she looked at me, her eyes gleaming. "The board has already approved the foreclosure," she announced. "But I wanted to give all of you, the members of this community, a voice. To show a united front. We will now vote. All in favor of foreclosing on the property of Mr. Jensen." Before anyone could raise their hand, I stood up. "Before you vote," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that commanded the room's attention, "I believe I am entitled to a few words in my defense." Brenda started to protest, but a murmur went through the crowd. They wanted to hear it. They were here for the drama. Reluctantly, she nodded. "Fine. A few words. Make it quick." I walked to the front of the room and turned to face my neighbors. I had set up a projector before the meeting started, aimed at the large white wall behind the board's table. "My name is Mark Jensen," I began. "I moved here 2 years ago for peace and quiet after my wife passed away. All I wanted was to be left alone. But our president, Brenda, decided that was not an option." I calmly and methodically detailed the harassment, from the paint to the garden hose to the threats against my wife's memorial garden. I held up the stack of violation notices. "Brenda has accused me of being a rule breaker," I said. "So let's talk about rules. Let's talk about trespassing. Let's talk about the destruction of private property." I clicked a button on my laptop. The projector whirred to life. And there, on the wall, 10 feet high, was the infrared video of Brenda, in her ridiculous ski mask, creeping onto my lawn and destroying my garden. The room erupted. Gasps. Shouts of disbelief. Brenda shot to her feet, her face sheet white. "That's a fake. That's doctored video. That's not me. Isn't it?" I said calmly, as the video showed her lifting the mask to reveal her furious face. "It's been authenticated by the police department. This is a copy of the criminal complaint for vandalism and trespassing that was filed this morning." I placed a document on the table in front of her. She stared at it, speechless. Her supporters looked horrified. "But this isn't just about flowers," I continued, my voice growing colder, harder. "This is about money. Your money. For the last 3 years, Brenda has been using a shell company, Evergreenscapes LLC, owned by her brother, to embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars of your HOA dues." I clicked again. The projector now showed the HOA's bank statements, with the massive payments to Evergreen highlighted. Next, I displayed the corporate filing for Evergreen, with her brother's name clearly listed. Carol, the treasurer, stood up from her seat on the board. "It's true," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "She made me do it. She made me sign the checks." Brenda turned on her, her eyes blazing with hate. "You treacherous little..." "And it gets worse," I cut her off. I projected the mortgage document onto the wall. 2.5 years ago, Brenda took out a multi-million-dollar loan against our community assets. Our clubhouse. Our pool. She told you it was for capital improvements. But most of that money was funneled directly to her brother's company. That isn't just embezzlement. That's bank fraud. And since she gave the orders via email, it's also felony wire fraud. The emails from Brenda to Carol filled the screen. The direct, undeniable proof. The room was in an uproar. People were standing, shouting at Brenda, who now seemed to shrink in her chair, a cornered animal. And that brings me, I said, my voice dropping as I delivered the final blow, to the lien. Brenda put a lien on my home. She threatened to take it. She did so in the name of the Lakeside Meadows HOA. But what Brenda failed to realize, what she couldn't possibly have known, is the identity of the bank that holds the mortgage on this HOA. I paused, letting the suspense build. I turned and looked directly at Brenda. The bank that she defrauded, the bank that holds the deed to this clubhouse we're standing in, happens to be my former employer of 32 years. And they are very, very interested to hear about all of this. On cue, the lawyer in the gray suit stood up. My name is Catherine Riley. I am counsel for the lending institution that holds the mortgage for this association's common properties. Due to evidence of extensive fraud, financial mismanagement, and criminal activity by your president, we have placed your loan in default. We are exercising our right to take immediate control of the assets. The finality of her words hung in the air. It was over. Brenda's kingdom had crumbled. Brenda finally snapped. She leaped to her feet, her face contorted in a mask of pure rage. You did this, she screamed at me, her voice a raw shriek. You can't prove anything. My brother does good work. We deserve that money. This is my community. It was a full confession, screamed in front of 100 witnesses. That was the signal. The two detectives at the back of the room stood up and began walking calmly toward the front. They flashed their badges. Brenda Cooper, one of them said, his voice calm but firm. You are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and vandalism. Her breakdown was complete. She started screaming, kicking, trying to claw her way out of their grasp. It was a pathetic, ugly spectacle. The queen was being dethroned, and she did not go quietly. As they pulled her, struggling and shrieking, toward the exit, she locked eyes with me one last time. You'll pay for this, Jensen, she howled, her voice echoing in the stunned silence of the clubhouse. I'll own this house. You'll see. It was the last, impotent threat of a fallen tyrant. I just watched her go, feeling not joy, not triumph, but a quiet, profound sense of justice delivered. The storm had passed. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Brenda and her brother were charged with a litany of felonies. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had provided, they both took plea deals. Brenda was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. Her brother got 5. They were forced to pay restitution, which bankrupted them completely. They lost their house, their savings, everything. The community was in shock for a while. The bank, with my guidance, worked with an interim board, headed by Frank and a now confident Carol, to restructure the loan. They audited the books, clawed back what they could, and set up transparent financial controls. The ridiculous rules Brenda had instituted were abolished in a single, cathartic meeting. The color, Swiss coffee, was officially back on the approved list. I became something of a reluctant local hero. People would stop me on the street to thank me. The young couple from the meeting brought me a home-baked pie. I was polite, but I deflected the praise. I hadn't done it for them. I had done it for Sarah. I had done it to protect the sanctity of her memory and the peace of our home. Months later, life in Lakeside Meadows had found a new, quieter rhythm. The fear that had permeated the neighborhood was gone, replaced by a sense of shared relief and cooperation. People started talking to each other again. There were neighborhood barbecues. Kids played in the street. It was finally becoming the community it was supposed to be. I spent most of my days in the garden. I had replanted the lavender and the marigolds. They were thriving. The whole garden was a riot of color and life, a testament to resilience. One sunny afternoon, I was sitting on my porch, just watching the bees buzz among the flowers. Frank walked over, a beer in each hand. He passed one to me and sat down in the chair next to mine. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying the peace. "You know," he said finally, "for a quiet numbers guy, you sure know how to bring the thunder." I took a sip of my beer and looked out at the garden, at the lavender swaying gently in the breeze. "Sometimes," I said, a small smile on my face, "the best way to protect your assets is to liquidate the liability." He clinked his bottle against mine. We didn't need to say anything more. The war was over. The peace I had come here to find, the peace I had fought so hard to reclaim, was finally, truly mine. Sarah would have loved it.